Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to answer your questions about wildflowers. And we're not going to delay, we're going to get right to the field and see what everyone's been discovering in response to questions you asked from last week.
By now, I'm sure many of you have gotten outside and seen some of those beautiful yellow flowers that we call dandelions. A few of you had questions about them. One of them was about why it produces that white fluff that we're familiar with. Well, the white fluff is actually the seeds. So like every plant, when it has become pollinated, the flower petals will fall off and the seed-bearing fruit will emerge. And that is the white fluff that we see. And attached to each seed, there's that white parachute-like structure that then carries the seed away in the wind. Remember, up to 8 kilometers they can travel. Another one of your questions was about the nutrition of dandelions. I mentioned that every part of the dandelion is edible, the root, the leaves, and the flower. Well, they have lots of really important nutritions. It's actually more nutritious than spinach. So the roots you can make a coffee out of or a tea. The leaves you can eat by cooking them in a pan, sauteing them, and it provides lots of different vitamins like A, vitamin K, vitamin C. And the flowers are also edible. You can dry them or just put them fresh in a salad. Now, you were wondering what they taste like. When they're younger and fresh and small, they can taste quite delicious. As they get older, they can be quite bitter. This one's pretty good. It's a younger one. Now, you'd want to be sure that you're not just picking dandelions from anywhere because they could be sprayed with chemicals or pesticides. So I encourage you to go into your yard and find some of those young, tender dandelion leaves, and as long as there's no pesticides or chemicals that you know that have been sprayed on them, to pick one and test it yourself. Or you can visit your local grocery store and see what they have to offer. You can also grab one of these white puffballs of the turned dandelions and see if you can blow all of the seeds off and make a wish. No luck.
One wildflower that we can often find growing on forest floors is wild strawberries. We have these at the Bill Mason Center in the meadow, and we love to be able to eat the berries once they have formed. Something else that likes to eat the berries are lots of different wild creatures. When I plant strawberries in my garden, I find that the chipmunks often get to the berries before I can. One cool thing is that animals will often help spread the seeds of wildflowers, especially when they produce a fruit like a berry. The animal will eat the fruit, digest the fruit, and then in their poop will spread the seeds around, allowing a new plant to grow. One really cool thing about wild strawberries is the 5 petals, bright white in color, with the bright yellow center, ready for attracting insects to pollinate these plants. Something else that's noticeable is the 3 leaves with sharply toothed or serrated edges. Wild strawberries, while they do spread with their seeds, will also spread using rhizomes underneath the ground. So they send out little runners or shoots and will grow more flowers around. That's why if we look further into the forest here, we can see lots of little white flowers of the strawberry plants ready to form beautiful fruits.
I am out in the community today to talk to you about a plant that does grow a flower but currently is not flowering. And this plant is really, really important for all of you to be aware of and to know how to identify, because it is known to cause serious burns or blisters if you do come in contact with the plant. It produces a sap that can be found in the stems, the leaves, and also the flowers that can cause your skin to be very, very sensitive to the sun. And so this plant right now, I'm sitting right next to it, but you might not be able to see it because it's so well camouflaged and blending in with the rest of the plants that are growing here. It's also quite short at this point, and this plant is called wild parsnip. Often where there is wild parsnip in the city, especially in public places, you will find one of these signs that the city has installed to warn you that it's there. But you're not always going to find this. Wild parsnip is an invasive species. It was brought here, we think, by early settlers who used the root of this plant as a food crop. It's edible. And it's quickly spread and taken over a lot of areas across North America. You can find it all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast in Canada and all the way down to California and back across to Florida. Because you won't always have a sign here to tell you that there's wild parsnip, it's really important to be able to identify this plant on your own. So in year one of this plant's growth, it's going to stay quite close to the ground like we see here. And there will be multiple long spindly leaves that will come out of the base of the plant where the root is. And in year one, there's a lot of root growth happening, so there's not as much happening above the ground.
It's easier to see the yellow parsnip in this patch here as there isn't as many green plants around. And so this is a plant probably in its first year, and you'll see a couple different compound leaves coming out from where the root would be down at the base. And each of these leaves has sort of looks like a stem, and then little tiny leaflets that are opposite of one another. And they sort of look like a mitten. So this is what the plant looks like before it's grown its flower.
In year two, you'll notice the same spindly leaves around the base, but the plant is then going to grow a single stalk, which is 2 to 5 centimeters thick and can be up to 1.5 meters tall. So this green smooth stem has some hairs on it, and later in the summer it will grow a beautiful, what looks like an upside down umbrella with a bunch of little tiny yellow flowers on it.
The shrub behind me here is also an invasive species, meaning it is not native to North America and was brought here from Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. This is the lilac shrub. Some of you might already be familiar with this plant, and it's hard not to notice at this time of year because of the incredible fragrance coming from the beautiful flowers that you see behind me. Often you'll smell a lilac tree before you see it. The beautiful blooms behind me are more in the lilac color, but the flowers can be white, a blue color, and even a darker deep purple and magenta. The shrub can start off quite small as a young plant, and then it can also tower over people and even be as tall as some of our homes and trees. Lilac shrubs and their flowers have been loved and appreciated by people for many generations and over time. And so you might find them today in many people's backyard gardens, and you also might find them in seeming natural places, very random places where they just seem to be a part of the landscape and nobody else is around. And so when you find a lilac shrub in the middle of an open field or in what seems to be, an area that's not really habited by people, this can be an indicator of an old settlement, maybe an old homestead that's no longer there.
One of the questions that you had about trilliums was whether or not it was illegal to pick trilliums. In our provincial and national parks, we are asked not to pick any living or growing plant. And although it's not illegal, it isn't a good idea to pick trilliums for a couple of reasons. One, because it takes them a very long time to mature. So when we pick them, it can damage the plant. It's said that if we pick a trillium that's flowered like this, no other trillium will grow in its spot, even if we leave the roots. We want to enjoy trilliums in their natural habitat, but leave them there. So it's okay to smell them or to take a picture of them, but not to pick them. The other question you had was about the red trillium and why it attracts pollinators that prefer dead and decaying meat. Flowers have to attract pollinators in order to spread and to create seeds and to reproduce. Flowers are competing to attract pollinators. So the white trillium might attract a pollinator that's active during the day and is attracted to that sweet smell. Another flower might attract a pollinator with a long proboscis because it has a long flower. The red trillium attracts decaying meat. And there might be flowers that bloom just at night to attract those night pollinators. Just like competition in the animal world, there's competition in the plant world for pollinators.
Now that you're caught up, I'd like to address some of the questions that came to me. And they didn't have to do with the trout lily. They were more questions about poison ivy. Remember, I interrupted last video to mention that I noticed the poison ivy was out in the trails near me. And there were a lot of questions about how to be sure that you're recognizing poison ivy when you're out there. And I think one of the main ways to do that is to look more closely at the plants that resemble poison ivy. There is poison ivy beside me right here on the trail. And if we look closely at it, you'll see those leaflets 3. I mentioned leaflets 3, let it be before. That's a single leaf, but it's called compound leaf. It has 3 distinct parts. And that's what we're going to be drawing. That's how we'll learn to really recognize poison ivy. And it can be highly variable. So I want to look at some things that we find out here that are not poison ivy. And one of those things, right here, is Manitoba maple. It has those 3 leaflets, and this is the leaf from the tree. It looks very similar to what we would expect to find in poison ivy, but it's got sharp edges. It's a bit pointier than I would tend to expect for poison ivy, and it's growing on a tree. This is a maple tree. As we move on down the trail, I've come across another thing of leaflets 3, and don't need to worry about letting this one be. It's got a very sawtooth edge. You might notice there at the edge of the leaf. Again, it's pointed, very similar structure, easy to confuse, but this is a raspberry. And we know that by looking at the stem of the plant and seeing those spines or thorns on the raspberry bush. Here's another one that was already mentioned by Christine. You can see this is wild strawberry again here. They're mixed in with poison ivy. So look at those, and then let's take some time to draw poison ivy today. So you'll need pencil and paper, whatever you like to draw with. And I think this will help us solidify the shape and the structure in our brain so that when we're out there looking for poison ivy, we have this reference to look back on. We're going to start with the main stem right down the middle. We'll draw the upper leaflet first. You can see that kind of jaggedy edge, and then the side leaflets. And again, sometimes they're smooth, sometimes they're a little rough. So I'm going around, I'm getting the point, and then I'm going to draw the mid vein on each of those leaves, and then the little side veins. And notice that those veins often end in a point. So kind of fill those in. And then I'm just going to go over it again. I want to add a little bit of color to it. I've got the basic shape, but it's not the green that I want. And I'm working with just whatever color I can find here. Try to match it. It looks really bright to me, so I'm kind of filling in. I'm using that color to emphasize the jaggedness of the edge. But again, it's not like the saw teeth that we saw in the raspberry. It's, you know, kind of bigger notches in it here. Add a little bit of yellow to it just so that it starts to shine a bit. And I notice when I look closely at the spot where the 2 leaflets on the side, like the arms, come together, it's really red in that area. So I want to emphasize that in my drawing. And there we have it. I hope that going through the process of drawing poison ivy has helped make it more memorable to you. And when you're out there looking for it, that you'll be able to go back to those sketches that you drew, even take them into the field with you. So until our next video, please be safe and have fun exploring your neighborhood.